The second of three presidential debates is coming up on Tuesday US time, Wednesday Australian time. And Sky News will have full uninterrupted coverage of it from midday Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, and then full analysis by our political editor David Spears, who is in Washington. Now, I want to talk about, Dr. Hart, what is expected, do you reckon, from this second debate?
Well, I think the poor performance of Obama in the first debate has probably been positive. I mean, the criticism in the media, the lampooning on comedy shows has probably given him a kick up the backside. He's got to do two things. He's got to defend his own performance a lot better than he did in the first debate, and he's got to attack Romney and Romney's positions a lot more than he did in the first debate. And Obama has had two great lessons on how to do this. Biden, in terms of substance, I mean, Biden performed very well in the vice presidential debate, and more importantly, Bill Clinton at the Democratic National Convention gave Obama a lesson in how to defend Obama's administration. That's what he's got to do. He's got to get the debate back onto policy. He's got to undermine Romney's policy positions, and I think both Clinton and Biden showed that that could be done with some ease.
There were a number of commentators who felt that Biden didn't do as well as his debater.
Well, I think they got distracted by the body language, the interrupting. But it's not about body language and interrupting and even bad manners. It's about substance. And I think in terms of substance, Biden came pretty close to wiping the floor with Paul Ryan. I mean, the interruptions, the aggressiveness put some people off. But again, I think that's a lesson for Obama. He's got to be more aggressive, but not as aggressive as Biden was last week.
Right, OK. David Smith, what was your view, or what is your view about what he really needs to do and what this second debate will give to the voters?
It's hard to say what the second debate is going to give to the voters, because I don't know how many of them are going to be watching this one. And of those, as John mentioned, it's less than half the number of people who will be voting. And people who turn in to watch one of these debates, especially one of the later ones, are probably people who've already made up their minds.
But didn't still something like 60 million people watch the first one? Are you saying the debates aren't that important?
Historically, they haven't been very important at all, and it's very difficult to actually pinpoint a debate that made a serious difference. Generally, there have been debates, 1960 between Kennedy and Nixon, 1980 between Reagan and Carter, that have been seen as pretty important, but in the end, all they did was to affirm a trend that was already going on. We've never really seen a debate historically that's actually turned a race around. What
if President Obama does perform well in the second debate? From what you've just said, does that mean the momentum could perhaps still go against him?
It's very hard to say. I think that if Obama does well in this debate, he'll get Democratic-leaning people back on side, a bit more enthusiastic about him again. And that is what he really needs to do in this debate, because, as John mentioned, there are really very few undecided people left. I think that one of the things that Biden did very well, and where actually his aggression and condescension might have helped, is that he was constantly asking voters, look, who do you actually trust? And what he came across as was an extremely experienced political operator, especially on things like Medicare and foreign policy, saying that these people are really actually politically unexperienced people who are going to embark on radical change without really knowing what they're doing. And so sometimes that aggression can actually pay off.
John Hart, what is happening with the money trail? I mean, are they both still, David mentioned it before when we were talking, but are they both still raising almost obscene amounts of money by Australian standards, by most people's standards?
That was the word I was going to use. They're both doing very well at raising and spending vast amounts of money, and it's got so bad this year that I doubt if you'll ever see a true figure for what each candidate spent or was spent on behalf of the candidates on the campaign. I guess really they just got to keep on spending. I guess the marginal utility of every extra dollar they spend is not going to be very high. But neither of them can stop spending. They're going to flood the battleground states with adverts right up to Election Day. By Election Day, people will probably be sick of it all. But nevertheless, that's the way American elections are going.
All right.
And it's going to be worse in 4 years' time.
David Smith, these battleground states, the swing states that we're hearing, they are, in a sense, there are, what, 9 of them, and they're similar, but they're much bigger, obviously, because they're a whole state, to our marginal electorates, aren't they? They have to win the voters in those particular states, those 9 out of 51, who tend to swing one way or the other at each election.
Because New York is never going to go Republican and Texas won't ever go Democratic. They're fighting over Nevada, Colorado, Wisconsin, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, Virginia and North Carolina. Now,
and out of those, isn't Ohio and Florida the most important because they've got the most electoral college votes?
They are very big, and those two, along with Virginia, tend to be the ones that swing the most. These states are quite different from each other, though, and what we're seeing now is Romney seems to have got a lead in Florida, which might reflect the fact that that's had one of the slowest economic recoveries, so they are very receptive to his message that recovery just isn't working. Ohio, on the other hand, has had one of the quickest, so they seem to be more receptive to the idea that Obama has got the economy back on track, and also because the auto industry is so important in Ohio and the stimulus package helped the auto industry so much. Voters there aren't happy with Romney, who was very much against the auto bailout. So you can't do the same thing to win all of the swing states.
All right, John Hart, just very briefly, I mean, it's only 23 days to go. The unemployment rate has sort of lessened slightly on the economic front. Is there still one gaffe, one piece of economic data, you know, one factor that's unforeseen that could change this campaign again?
Well, I guess the other thing would be if the budget deficit blew out even more. But in fact, over the weekend, the US government published figures showing that the budget deficit had actually been reduced to $1.1 trillion instead of $1.3 trillion. So the economy seems to be going in the right direction very slowly.
Change.
But it could change. Well, the budget deficit figure won't change. I doubt if the unemployment figure will change. The gaffe would have to be something sensational and of a personal nature, I think, to really upset the trend that's already in place.
All right. David Smith, what's your feeling? Could one thing still kind of change this momentum again?
I agree, not economically. And the last jobs report was actually the first one in a few years.
No, but a campaign gaffe, you know, some fact about something dreadful, some, you know, something happening elsewhere in the world that affects them.
Oh, yes, something like that, or some kind of foreign policy catastrophe could also happen in either way. But we are rapidly approaching the point where it's almost event-proof. The point at which events could affect it much more was back in August and September.
And who's going to win then, if it's event-proof?
Look, it is still very hard to say, but on the balance of probabilities, I would still say Obama.
All right, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. Dr. David Smith and Dr. John Hart, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks.